Hi everyone, so my name is Ayrton Faraz Stoneman. I'm 25 years old from Johannesburg, South Africa. Today I'll be discussing my assignment 5 for anthropology, which will be on the differences between African anthropology versus native and indigenous anthropology. So to start off, I will be breaking up the discussion into 3 parts. Some might be longer than others, but yeah. The 3 are native, the definition of native or indigenous anthropology. Then I will be discussing the history of anthropology in Africa. And then to conclude, I think it's the longest one, will be what is African anthropology, which is quite dense. Okay, so let's jump into it. Native or indigenous anthropology. While there are many similarities in these anthropologies, native or indigenous anthropology is centered on the role of the researcher, so the person who is studying, or the anthropologist. This was a response of the challenges that anthropology, as a result of its foundations of studying the other. Native or indigenous anthropology was about highlighting the challenges and the advantages of studying your own society. So your own society or your own culture. Like if you're from America, you will be using your frame of reference from America, even if you're studying Mozambique, which would not make a lot of sense applying your own maybe if you compare it, but yeah, like that's what it means. If you are from America or South Africa or Nigeria, you will be using your own society as frame of reference when studying the other. This was not about the foundations of anthropology per se. However, scholars such as Delmos, who we will be discussing soon, did raise the issue as he argues. Um, as far as theory is concerned, there is yet no set of theoretical conclusions generated from the point of view of native anthropologists. By native anthropology, Delmos means a set of theories based on non-Western presets and assumptions in the same sense that modern anthropology is based on, and has supported Western beliefs and values. So, like my example. So long as the use of native anthropologists does not lead to the development of a native anthropology, I, meaning Delmos, disagrees with the statement that the science of anthropology has been greatly enriched by those informants who were influenced by anthropologists to become anthropologists. This is a process not yet achieved. Its occurrence will benefit anthropology as a whole and may well prevent the death of anthropology, predicted by some current writers. The idea presented by Delmos was never achieved by native or indigenous anthropology, sadly. This is similar to African anthropology, and where anthropology should take into account the epistemology of the discipline as a historical account. Native anthropology is within the politics of anthropology that can be observed in African anthropologists, but does not mean it is African anthropology. Even though Delmos advocated for a shift in anthropological values as a base for native anthropology, he did not, however, advocate for the application of those values to other societies. Here's another extract from his argument. A basic aim of anthropological field research is to describe the total culture of a group of people. This description, as much as possible, should be made from the point of view of the people, meaning an insider's view. For the anthropologist to obtain such a description, you must become actively involved in the life of the people, communicate with them, spend a considerable period of time among them. With these general goals as the primary emphasis, it seems obvious that the trained native anthropologist can produce the best and most reliable data, since he knows the language, has grown up in the culture, and has little difficulty in becoming involved with the people. In this extract, the focus of native anthropology remained about studying your own group. Even if Dalmas did advocate for the epistemologies, they weren't meant to analyze data that is collected from the native or indigenous peoples. African anthropology, as I am presenting, on the other hand, is about using African epistemologies to study all societies, so from an African perspective. At the end, native or indigenous anthropology became about the insider-outsider point of view, as Dalmos points out in another extract. The crucial point is that insiders and outsiders may be able to collect different data. They also have different points of view, which may lead to different interpretations of the same set of data. In other words, African anthropology provides other values to the foundations of anthropology. Okay, so moving on to the next section, the history of anthropology within Africa. To understand African anthropology, it is important to understand the history of anthropology in Africa. The history of anthropology in Africa was associated with colonialism, and as such, many African leaders did not see the value in anthropology. This had a negative impact in anthropology in Africa because in post-independent Africa, in many universities, the anthropology departments were closed, and many joined African languages and sociology. Even in Kenya under Kenyatta, who studied anthropology and was supervised by Malinowski, he did not advocate for anthropology in the State University of Nairobi. It is in this context that we can understand African anthropologists who became critical of anthropology rather than practicing anthropology. There were a few Africans who remained in the field of anthropology, and one of those is Archie Mafeje. Okay, so South Africa remained one of the last or few countries in Africa that continued to offer anthropology at universities because of apartheid, which only ended in 1994, which also ended the subjugation of black people. It means that South Africa, white people remained in control of the curriculum within the university, and anthropology thrived as informed apartheid policies. In South Africa, there are English and Afrikaans universities predominantly, and these universities had different anthropologies that were informed by these nationalities. English universities offered anthropology, while Afrikaans universities offered volkekunde, the nationalist Afrikaner version of anthropology. The differences are not important right now in this discussion, but it is important to recognize within these anthropologies the role of black anthropologists was relegated to fieldwork. It is in this context that many black anthropologists contributed to political anthropology rather than mainstream anthropology. So early black anthropologists such as Maguban and Mafeje were more interested in the representation of black people within anthropology. Following this suit, black anthropologists did voice out this discomfort of being reduced to field workers. Post-1994, post-apartheid, one would imagine that the situation would have changed, but it's still the same. This can be observed in the publications post-1994 that still lament about this reality of black anthropologists in the universities of Southern Africa. One example of these laments is from Mpilo Pearl Sitole in her book entitled Unequal Peers, the politics of discourse management in the social sciences that raised issues that are faced by African scholars who are peer-reviewed by Western scholars to be recognized as real scholars, which doesn't make any sense. However, this does not mean that they have never been anthropologists that sought to use African epistemologies to produce anthropological knowledge. Mafeje, in his early work on African societies, was aiming to produce anthropology that draws from African epistemologies, so from Africa. It is in this context that he was able to detect the discourse on tribes that it was not inherently African, because he studied African societies without using Western concepts, even though his work was political. He did apply anthropological techniques to produce knowledge. Hence, most of his work remained anthropological. This is similar to the work of Sheikh Anta Diop, who produced anthropological knowledge that is based on African epistemologies. The three issues that became central aspects from Diop's scholarship were the reclamation of ancient Egyptian civilizations as a Black African construct to serve as a classical reference archive. The second was proposing a historical depth which incorporate 2,000 years of African history and therefore the achievement of ancient African empires and highlight the link between Egypt and Nubia. The third was the establishment of fundamental African moral philosophy. This was his theory of matriarch as a unifying African moral code and culture. Diop went further, arguing that matriarchy is the basis of African culture unity, of our African culture unity. It is in fact this history, this culture, that is manipulated in our nationalist rhetoric when we call for peace, love, and unity as opposed to violence. We refer to the moral compulsion of love and unity based on the spirit of common motherhood when we say our motherland, Mother Africa, or Mama Africa. We are thus constructing a collective identity or consciousness based on a matriarchy in spite of our differences and contradictions. Diop contributed in knowledge, but sadly, as Amadume points out, his knowledge was manipulated to suit the Western agenda within Africa. Even though we have these African anthropologists that have advocated for African anthropology, and even went out to apply their ideas, we still do not have African anthropology. This is because the role of Black anthropologists within Africa and Southern Africa in particular has been reduced to fieldwork, and thus the response to this has been writing political work rather than anthropological work, with few exemptions such as Mafeje, who was also very critical of anthropology. So if we deploy more African anthropologists into research instead of just reducing them to fieldwork, we can start building on true African anthropology. So what is true African anthropology would be my next section. From that section into what is African anthropology, what needs to be made clear is that we still do not have a theory that is defined as African anthropology. What the previous section I was talking about was that it was basically an outline of the history of African anthropology or anthropology within Africa. And what this new section is going to do is present a new theory that draws from the work of early African anthropologists, namely some of them that we've already spoken about. In other words, we need to use their findings to develop a theory to study all societies, like a true African anthropology. We suggest that there is enough information from Africa and about African ways of knowing and living, and it is time that we use and apply that knowledge. It then builds on these works and links them with the epistemology of the Amazulu. one of the indigenous groups in Southern Africa. What is important to mention here is that in African epistemology, identity is in motion because it is founded on the philosophy of Ubuntu. I am because we are, which according to Ramos is the recognition of being becoming. This means that the Amazulu is not an exclusive group, but a group formed from the interaction with other African groups. It will follow then that their epistemology is not exclusively a Zulu epistemology, an Amazulu epistemology, but an epistemology in which most indigenous groups from South Africa, if not all of Africa, draw from. The Amazulu are therefore used not as an exception, but as an example, just to make sure that we are acute in our analysis by not overgeneralizing, especially that there are differences amongst indigenous groups in the world and in Africa, and these differences are important because they provide us with nuances of an African culture, so specifically in Africa. Okay, so drawing from a different epistemology, African anthropology moves beyond the theories that have occupied themselves with how other societies should be studied, but to introduce new values that should inform anthropological research. These values encourage us to study all societies, because all societies, with no exception, possess knowledge that is pertinent in informing an alternative world to the modern world that has created more problems for what is perceived as the other than it has solutions. It would not be a method to study African societies, but to use African epistemologies to study any society. We want to expand the values from which we understand societies. African anthropology moves beyond the politics that are entangled in anthropology because we take Mafege's positionality that these politics are not anthropological but cut across all disciplines, while we understand why anthropologists such as Amadume refers to anthropology as a racist discipline and suggests that it should change its name. In African anthropology, we believe that what anthropology sought to do, all other societies did it. We try to show how other societies learned and developed themselves from other societies. With this understanding, we are not challenging anthropology, but expanding its foundations. So, to include another one of Amedume's writings, Amedume reckons that African cultures provide an alternative to the world of violence that is founded on Western epistemology. So the writing goes, finally, I, like Amedume, showed that even the French economic anthropologists, in spite of their ideological superiority complex, were ethnocentric and lacked a gender perspective in their analysis of class and lineage systems. The most important production unit, the matricentric unit, the basis of structure of African matriarchy and common to all African social structures, has been invisible in the theoretical formulations in African studies. Yet the moral values which this system generated constitute the basis of effective relationships so badly needed as an alternative to the present political culture of violence underlying all the current problems of Africa. I, Amadume, have consequently proposed that we give gender a central place in social inquiry and critical analysis. Since anthropology has a history of racism, we should change it to a combination of social history and sociology of history. So, to conclude, um, to understand African anthropology, we need to define what is anthropology and its role within society. Throughout the module, we discussed culture in study unit 1, and we did that because culture is what anthropology studies essentially. They further explained in the subsequent study units the importance of culture, and to reiterate what we have discussed in the previous study units, according to Levi Strauss, anthropology studies the other societies so that we know and learn about ourselves as individuals and human beings. Strauss, believed that in order to improve our lives, we need to study the other. This is how Levi Strauss justified anthropology, but he is doing this from a Western perspective. In study unit 2, when we discuss race and explain the beginning of science in the Western world, um, it was concerned about the conception of man. Levi Strauss's assertion is in relation to this Western discourse of man, but not all societies were concerned about answering the question of who is man. However, other societies were concerned about developing themselves. One such society is the Amazulu. African anthropology does not claim universality, but is informed by African values so that it can become an African-centered anthropology. Thank you so much for listening to my video presentation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I resonated very much with this specific study unit in the study guide, and this is because I actually wanted to study anthropology as well as African archaeology and art history, because I find that a lot of the things that are published in the world are very Western based. And even myself, as a Western man from South Africa, being brought up in South Africa, I am very interested in rewriting um, the African curriculum for Africans. And yeah, I'm very happy to have participated in this course, and I am looking forward to everything that is coming in the future. Thank you so much.